Perhaps one of the most fundamental aspects of life that we need to understand is what I call perspective and viewpoint. Many times we make a mistake because of thinking that our viewpoint is the same as the viewpoint of another person. And in this video, I want you to understand the difference between perspective and viewpoint. And let me start by saying that the viewpoint of a person determines how they see things. You see, if you're at the top of a building and someone who's at the ground, you're not going to see the same thing, even if you're looking at the same object. There's what you call the aerial view, there's the horizontal view, probably there's the diagonal view, and I don't know which other view there is. But depending on where you stand, what you see will not be the same as what another person sees. And that is the that's a very good illustration about life. Sometimes we can be looking at the same thing, the same situation, but the way we analyze and even interpret the result depends on our viewpoint. A good example is when you are standing on one side and I present to you number 6, like a placard written number 6. If you're on the upper side, you might even think it is number 9. So your viewpoint determines what you see and how you interpret things. And let me just use another very illustrative example, very effective example. Let's say, for instance, there is an accident that happens on your way to Nairobi from Nakuru, and out of the 10 people who are in the bus, 7 of them die. Only 3 people survive. And in that road accident, you happen to bring 5 people on board to come and investigate the cause of the accident. Probably you bring on board a mechanic, and then the moment the mechanic is done, you bring a psychologist. When the psychologist is done, you bring a traffic police. When the traffic police is done, you bring a pastor, and then eventually you bring an elder, a traditional elder, a religionist, a person who believes in cultural traditions and things like that. And then you take a report from each one of them of what really happened or transpired before the accident happened. What kind of a report do you think that you'd expect to get from, for instance, a mechanic? So a mechanic will definitely, if if your guess is as good as mine, will probably focus on the mechanical problems that could have caused the accident. So he'll look at where there was a tire burst, whether there was a gear issue, or any other mechanical problem that you can imagine or think about. On the other hand, a psychologist will really start to imagine probably the driver was not well rested. Maybe he had a mental problem, a headache, or he was sleepy. So something to do with the driver. When you look at the traffic police, you'll be looking at the traffic offenses that may have been caused leading to the accident, because they believe that for an accident to happen, there must be a law that was broken or something like that. And if it is a pastor, obviously he'll talk about spiritual bondages. Maybe there are some demons around that particular place, and that is why the accident happened. And if you look at a person like the elder, he'll start thinking, you see, there were 10 people here, 3 survived, 7 died. This must be nothing but a cultural curse, probably. So these people are cursed. Maybe there are some sacrifices that they have not fulfilled. There are some things that they haven't fulfilled. So at the end of the day, if you read all these reports, you'll be so confused because you'll not even understand what really caused this accident. And if you bring a person like a historian, he'll even start talking about the number of accidents that has happened in that particular place, how many people have died in that area. Maybe that place is a black spot. So the viewpoint will depend on either your psychology or your state or your profession or what you do. And for that reason, viewpoint is very limiting. People who determines or decides, makes decisions based on viewpoint are very limited. And for that reason, it's very important for us to understand the power of viewpoint, because it has the power to make you see things, to focus on things that are not, and to even imagine that they are real. People who are very narrow point are very dangerous, because even spiritually, they're the people who lead to manipulation of others. They just tend to perceive a certain thing, and they can even extract a verse in the Bible, like a good example of a pastor who used to ask for offerings from people, that all you have to do to solve all your problems is just send 310. And many people would send 3:10, and he said that he got a revelation from the book of Malachi 3:10, where if you give to God, he'll open the doors of heaven and of abundance. And using that particular verse, just that verse, it doesn't matter how you live, it doesn't matter um, whether you are saved or not. What matters is that you just send that sacrifice and all your problems go away. And of course, we know that is a very wrong viewpoint. So there is something now we call the perspective. If you really want to experience life the right way, you have to broaden your perspective. There's what you call the perspective. Now, perspective is viewing things on a broader spectrum, not on one particular basis. If it is your faith in God, it cannot be based on one scripture or one verse or one story in the Bible. No, you got to broaden your perspective. If it is about interpreting life and seeing things, the more you read, the more you understand things on a broader perspective, the more you'll be able to solve many more problems. And even the more you'll be able to understand people. The reason why we have conflicts with people is because we are seeing things differently. We expect other people to see things like we do see them. But when you broaden your perspective, and that is why you usually hear there is an expectation of people who are learned or people who are saved. There is a way that you expect them to view things and to see things. There are things we do not expect them to do or in a certain way or to behave. So now, let me just talk about two things. How now do you broaden your perspective so that you stop seeing things from just one narrow viewpoint? And I want to list a few things that you can do. And the first one is reading widely. You cannot just read the Bible. Well, even if you're a pastor, you need to broaden your mindset, because interpreting everything as spiritual is a very narrow viewpoint, because you'll not be able to understand the world. And you remember, we are in the world. Even though we are not of this world, we are still in the world. So you got to understand finance, you got to understand health, you got to understand emotional balance and emotional control. You got to understand how things work and how people relate, how relationships are created. These are things that you must learn. It doesn't matter what your profession is, you got to understand all these things if you're going to broaden your perspective. The other thing is exposure. People who are widely traveled, people who have lived with diverse ethnic groups, people speaking different languages, different races, definitely have a broader spectrum than people who are born and bred in one particular place, went to school in their village, they have remained in that particular place. There is a way that people who are brought up in just one place view things, and then there is a way that people who have a big exposure view life. So the more you travel, the more you live in many places, the more you keep on moving, the more you understand, the more you broaden your perspective. The other number three, the number three way of improving or broadening your perspective is mentorship. Mentorship, and I want you to be very, very careful with mentorship, because you can be brainwashed if you're just mentored by one person. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is to trust in one person so much that everything they say you consider it to be a gospel truth. Personally, I have a mentor in business, I have a mentor in family life, I have a mentor in spiritual matters, I have a mentor in worship, and I have a mentor in prayers. I have many people who mentor me because I don't want to be this person who looks like a copy of a certain person. I need to get the best from the best in their area of domain. But I cannot allow myself to be mentored by just one person, because that way you're shortening your viewpoint, you're not broadening your perspective. So to the extent that that is possible, if there are areas of life that you want to really become the best, then you have to identify the best people in that area, learn from them. But once you finish learning from them, go and learn something else from someone else. And that way you are broadening your perspective. And the other way is, of course, to have teachers, because mentors are different from teachers. Mentors are people who already have gone ahead of you, they know what they are saying, they have experienced it. But teachers are people who have read books, who have seen experiences from others, and they can teach you something. And finally, the fifth way is, if you're a man of prayer, a woman of prayer, pray. Pray, because in the place of prayer, you and especially if you are this kind of a person who can pray in spirit, you know, you are edifying yourself, so you are broadening your mind, you are being transformed and renewed. You start seeing things the way God sees them, because the word of God says that as high above um as the skies are from the earth, so is our mind far from the thinking of God. So the more you relate with God, you fellowship with God in the place of prayer, praying in spirit, praying in understanding, the more then you broaden your perspective. So I want you to understand this, that a viewpoint may not necessarily be your mistake, because we all come from different cultures. There's a way we were nurtured, there is a way we were taught to see things. But as for perspective, it is all your responsibility. If you're going to change your perspective, it will depend on you. Start taking responsibility, start seeing life from a broader perspective. Do not allow yourself to be a culprit of situation and circumstances and outside, blaming the prevailing circumstances for everything that happens around you. Like right now, there are many people who are blaming politics, saying the president is doing this or that. But the problem is you're focusing on one particular viewpoint, and that is the political. But if you start focusing on the fact that there are people who have value and are succeeding and doing so well, you'll realize that there are some things that you can take responsibility and change your life. So decide today to take responsibility and succeed and prevail. Take responsibility, take responsibility.